Hi, I'm Katerina. In this video, we're going to cover this very special, very important announcement. And that is all of the big four pattern companies were just sold to a liquidator. So don't go away. Let's talk about Simplicity, Butterick, Vogue, and McCall's. Let's talk about them in just a moment. Welcome to my channel and let's get right into it. I'm Katerina with Create with Katerina. Please like, subscribe. I am trying to reach my goals here on YouTube, so I would love your help in that. Today's topic is kind of heartbreaking for me because I learned to sew with patterns, and I love the very thin paper patterns that a lot of you are in my audience are of my age and above, and so how we used to go to the store, and we used to go into Joann's or Hancock's or big fabric stores, and they would have tables and drawers and books, and you would look through the Simplicity catalog, you would look through the McCall's catalog, and then you'd find the number, right? Let me see if I have, they don't have the numbers anymore, but remember they used to have the number up at the top, and then you would go to the drawer and you would find your pattern, take it out of the drawer, and then you would go and pay for it, right? Well, McCall's, Simplicity, Butterick, and Vogue are the iconic big four pattern companies in the world, and they just sold to a liquidator. So let's talk about what that means, but let's just go back and let's just think and bring back our memories of what it was like to sew with patterns, because these companies have over a century of sewing history. Like, some of these companies are so freaking old that they started so many years ago. Let me give you just some background here. And I got notes because I get afraid that I'm going to mix up dates. Simplicity started, which was always my favorite sewing company because they were simple. And that's what I really liked about them. So Simplicity started in 1927, and they offered easy to use, affordable patterns. I remember when Vogue was so expensive, but I could afford Simplicity. So Simplicities are were much less, cost a lot less, and they still do today. Sorry, my camera is kind of weird right there. Back in 1927, they sold the patterns for 15 cents. Can you believe that? They also are the ones who pioneered sewing education. There was no sewing education prior to that. You would have to have, if you didn't know how to sew yourself, you would learn from your mother and grandmother and everything. But if you were a professional sewer, then you would make your money by sewing, altering clothes and creating your own patterns. And it was a difficult process. McCall's was established in 1870 by James McCall. He was the first to use printed cutting lines in 1919, and he was the first to use colored envelopes in 1932. And then Vogue Patterns started in Vogue magazine in 1899, and they introduced what they called the couture fashion patterns to home sewists in 1914. And those were the more high-end. And they were more difficult to sew when I was young because I tried them all when I was a kid. These brands they've been around for so long, over 100 years, and they're just like so iconic to me and such a big part of my sewing journey. And they have so much history. They own the last tissue. So what happened? Oh, and Butterick is the other one. Butterick was founded in 1863 by Ebenezer Butterick. He was the first to offer graded sizes in the patterns. And that revolutionized home sewing because then you would buy one pattern, remember that? And it would have size 7, 8, 9, 10, and you would cut along those lines. Whereas before you'd have to buy your size, right? And, but this is going to have a huge impact on the entire pattern ecosystem because let me just grab the paper real quick. Sorry. So first of all, they all use this newsprint kind of paper. So that's not going to be being used anymore. Okay. So can you imagine millions and millions of yards of this not even being used anymore. And then, let me just get out and then remember this, this paper, the tissue paper, the factories that make this, they're not going to be making this anymore once it's liquidated, if the liquidator just decides not to do anything about it. So I doubt it. Anyway, so they also own, the biggest problem with it is these companies own the tissue printers in the United States of America. And so even if you're an indie printer, even if you're making your own, and people who make their own patterns, they depend on these companies who print that tissue paper. And so what's going to happen? So that's the other thing. What's going to happen to them? And on June 5th of this year, IG Design Group, who owns the U.S. division, including all 4 of those pattern companies, sold to the Hilco Capital. They sold it for $1 plus 75% of future sales. So who knows, again, what is that going to do? Hilco's a liquidation firm. So what does this all mean? And they are the same group, yuck, 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 that handled Joann's bankruptcy. And we saw what they did there. Remember how they raised the prices really high and then lowered them? Yeah, I have lots of stories about how the Hilco Capital liquidators take care of business. Anyway, this is going to be a lot of big changes. So I wanted to, it's a huge blow to our craft, right? It's a huge blow to sewers, to crafters, to just the entire business. But okay, so whenever there's something like that happens where an industry sells off or ends, then it's always making rise to something coming up, right? So when something goes, one door closes, another door opens. So this is the kind of thing that's going on now. So what's very popular right now is that there's a lot of small business and solopreneurs who make their own patterns, and they sell those like on Etsy, and they sell them on their own Shopify sites and things like that. And those are called indie pattern makers. So the indie industry means individual, indie means individual. They are the ones that will, they offer PDF downloads, projector-friendly files, and what they call AO formats for print shops. So a lot of them will do a video tutorial. So instead of reading like we used to, I like the reading part, by the way, instead of a tutorial, but instead of going step by step with these illustrations like this, they are doing like video illustrations. They use Facebook support groups and all kinds of ways to market their patterns. They also can have very beginner-friendly clothing, very detailed. So there's some pretty well-known indie companies, like there's Tilly and the Buttons, Ellie and Mac, Patterns for Pirates, Friday Pattern Company, Made by Ray, So Liberated, and Jay Lee. We may start to see fewer and fewer of the tissue kind, because a lot of these ones, when I buy the patterns from, let me just show you, I have an example here. I bought a tote pattern. Oops, sorry, it's my phone. I bought a tote pattern. So first of all, let me just show you real quick. This was the pattern that I showed you, well, another one from Simplicity, right? This is the pattern. This is the instructions. And then this is the tissue paper, and you cut it out and everything, right? Well, so I bought a pattern from Etsy, and this is what I got. So I got this, the picture of the tote bag, what the materials I'm going to need, and then more stuff like that. And then the patterns are more like this, and it's more like this explaining. Let me see if I can show you. Preparing the handle, for instance, the tote bag handle. So she gives an explanation, she writes about it, she shows a diagram, same thing like this. And then She has assembling the tote and then pictures on how to do that. Your edge stitching, explaining how to do that. And then your fabric requirements and how much you need. So there's no tissue, and that she's not using a newsprint. I have to print it myself, right? So that is how a lot of indie patterns are, okay? The other thing is, if you are going to be looking for these, for Simplicity, Vogue, Butterick patterns, we have to understand that the price is going to go up. So the less there is, right? I always forget to say it. Product demand, right? So the more demand there is, the higher the prices go. Indie designers will fill this gap most likely, and we're going to have to learn how to adapt, unfortunately. And some of us might have to learn how to do our own drafting. Now, I know how to do drafting. I don't like to, so I don't do it. But I learned drafting when I was like 15 years old, and I did invent my own patterns. Where I lived in Hawaii, there was no store where I could buy Simplicity or Vogue. So I had to create my own patterns. And I had one of those mannequins, and I would lay, the pieces on there. They're not called mannequins. I'm sorry. I can't remember what they're called. I haven't even used one of those body busts. Anyway, so a couple of tips I have for you is save, and I didn't save any. When I moved from, one time when I moved from California to Utah, I threw all my patterns away pretty much. When I moved from Utah back when I moved from Utah to Washington State, did the same thing. When I moved to Florida, did the same thing. So, and as my kids grow and I didn't need them, I would just give them away to my friends who had little kids because I sewed for all my kids. And so anyway, save your patterns. Try out, support small businesses. That's another big thing, right? Learn how to use these PDF patterns. It's really out of my comfort zone, but I am learning. But it does feel like an end of an era, but let's think and let's just enjoy our roots. But in the comments, please tell me which of the big four was your favorite. Who was your favorite? Which company was your favorite and why? And what are you going to do about your patterns now? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.